we have a very special conversation, very special guest today. Best Practice from Seattle, Washington is here, and I'm going to let Scott introduce them in just one moment as people are continuing to trickle in. But first and foremost, I would like to thank our sponsors. This year, the Small Firms Roundtable sponsors for 2021 are Mend Services, Syntex Sash and Door, and Knight Construction. And we thank all of them deeply for their generous support of this AIA Austin committee. And their support has allowed us to put on these events for hopefully everyone's benefit. So today we are going to be just having a conversation with another small firm based in Seattle, Washington, as I mentioned. And as Scott is getting settled in here, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him to introduce our guests. Take it away, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Sean, for the introduction. One of the things that Sean and I have been talking about since kind of planning 2021 is how can we talk about small firms, but also talk about the things about how firms started, the idea of like beginnings, and oftentimes share in those stories that we'd often share over beers, since we're not doing that now. Sometimes there's dirty secrets, sometimes there's good and bad, but the fact is we all share and have a lot of information within each of our practices. I'm honored to have the firm Best Practice here today. I am a big fan of their work. I've seen it in person and admired it from afar through social media. They are a really creative group and an interesting culture, which we'll get to. Founded in 2011 by Ian Butcher, the firm Best Practice focuses on all kinds of work. They specialize in commercial. They also do a lot of residential, from accessory dwelling units to now multifamily projects. We have lots of questions to ask them. But one thing I really admire about them is that they have a creative studio culture, where the idea that you have to be creative not only in the office, but also at home. And with that, they've been awarded many, many awards and published internationally. They were recognized in 2019 as the AIA Pacific Northwest Emerging Firm. So with that, everyone, welcome Best Practice.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
I'm Ian.
I'm Kaylin. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
So, Ian, how did you start this?
Good question. I was working in 2009 and 2010 at another very creative firm that was led by an artist who's not trained as an architect, and I was sort of stopped growing, I thought, professionally, and the economy was really sort of sad and bleak, and I wanted to do something different, and I didn't know what. And because there was no work, I just decided, well, I'll find something. And so I just asked around and decided didn't really have a long plan at the time to start a firm. It was by necessity. And soon after I got one job, that became another job. And then it started to feel pretty good.
What was your first job?
I did a office bar. I actually got hired to do the kitchen of an office that grew in scale quite a bit. And it became a pretty good sized project. And that was our first office project. And now we routinely do office work. So that was the first job.
I went to the party for the opening of that project. It's really fun.
Yeah.
And now, Kaylin, when did you join the firm?
I joined in 2014, and I had, worked in New York and moved back to Seattle and was working at a large firm, which is a great office but I was kind of feeling like the corporate world wasn't necessarily for me. And I kind of bullied Ian into being a mentor a little bit. And that sort of snowballed into like, well, let's do a little competition together. Let's see how we work together. And kind of ended up that we have a lot of good compatible sort of ways of working. And one day Ian called me and was like, I have too much work. You have a month to decide. Let me know. So kind of left.
I bullied her into working with me.
Yeah. And so now it's been like 7 years next week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. So speaking of work, how do you guys operate? Like how do you share the work?
Well, I mean, I think, we're sincerely really collaborative. And I think what Kaylin and I learned, we were friends before we were colleagues. And so I always knew her as the partner of one of my classmates. And so I didn't know her as a designer. And so when she called me to sort of just chat about things and she showed me her portfolio, I was like, oh man, this is great. Like, I want to work with you. And so we learned that we have very complementary skill sets. And so while there are projects in the office that are sort of more of a Kaylin project or more of an Ian project, we always make time to sort of look at each other's work. I'm not nervous to show work to anyone else other than Kaylin. Like Kaylin's the one that I get a little bit nervous about, like, okay, what's she going to tell me is wrong on this one? And I maybe it's the same for you. But so
I think in terms of that, like we both kind of have a thing that helps the other one be better. Like I'm a little bit more weird than Ian, so I make things a little weirder, and he makes the things that I do, like the weird, he makes it a little bit more palatable, I guess. So like we sort of balance each other out that way, and I think that works really, really well. But we also like really champion all the people in our office. They have great ideas, and we would rather be known as like an office that just everyone is creative and having ideas. It's not necessarily one person or a singular design vision. And I think that's super important to us. And I think it helps to empower your employees to feel that way.
And I've always felt like, everywhere I've worked prior to best practice, there was sort of a kind of a singular vision at the top, and they were really kind of disparate people that I had primarily worked for. And I didn't know what I was really excited when I started it I didn't know what my projects would look like. And I was deliberate in calling it best practice, not Ian Butcher architecture, because I knew that I'm best working with other people and sort of having them sort of infect what I'm thinking and vice versa. And so I think, all of our projects, like we're involved, everybody in the office is sort of heavily involved in all the projects. I think as we grow, that might have to sort of, evolve, but we like to bring everybody in. And I sort of feel like my job for the most part is more of a curator at times, to sort of make sure, we have the luxury and the burden of making the final decision as to what we do. But we certainly aren't saying it has to come from our brain.
Right.
How many people are in your office besides the two of you?
7 right now.
7. Okay. And how have you come to have employees or collaborators? Has it been, we've got more work, we need to post it for a job, or has it been more organic in terms of kind of in the way that you two sort of recognize something between the two of you? Have you found other people in that same way, or how has the office grown?
Well, I think
both ways actually.
Okay.
I think getting to 3 seemed kind of easy. Like there was always we could always use someone to help.
Yep.
Getting to 5 was a real hurdle, and 7 was even a bigger hurdle. So we've been fortunate to find really good people, and we've had some people come and go, and because they wanted to go to grad school or wanted to become an artist or just move. So we've been lucky. Everybody that we has worked here has been like a really important part and had significant contributions to the work.
That said, we're pretty cautious about growth. Like there were times when, like a few years ago, when Seattle is still exploding and crazy, but things, as you know, are a little volatile right now. But even before, we could have grown, but we deliberately sort of kept our team a little bit leaner, just because we don't want to just kind of expand really fast, because I think that would have implications on how we work and our culture
And the projects we take.
and the projects we take.
Yeah.
So we've been really, I think maybe some might say overly cautious, but in terms of like, you never know what kind of global pandemic's going to hit you.
Yeah.
Logic, we've actually
Yeah.
I think we've made some good decisions that have allowed us to, like, we didn't have to shed a bunch of people,
Sure.
last year or things like that,
Speaking of that, a lot of people we've spoken with, how did you react to last March? Like, did you panic and send everyone home and say yes to every project? Like, how did you handle that?
There's a lot of whiskey.
I mean, we didn't panic, but we were certainly pretty concerned, and like we were, focused on like keeping everybody happy, keeping everybody busy. And so, and like, we had started a big website project and we were like, oh, should we stop doing that? And we were just like, well, if we stop doing that, the other small business that's working on it isn't going to have any work. So we sort of were like, let's stay the course on a lot of things. And like, we gave as much work to our employees as we could to keep them busy. And we did some other like
we did
admin stuff, get PPP loans.
Yeah, our bookkeeper was helpful to sort of very quickly get us the paperwork we needed for the PPP loans. So that was instrumental.
Yeah. So we didn't panic, but we were certainly like in like intensity mode.
We have had over the past couple of years, we have 2 large kind of more corporate projects that have sort of been much bigger, and that sort of was actually aided us in growing from 5 to 7 people. So those particular projects did not stop. So we were fortunate.
One stopped for a while.
Yeah, one went on hold. It was under construction, and they couldn't. We stopped doing CA because there was no construction. But the other one kept going. I was really concerned we were going to get the call that said they're stopping that project, and that continued to go.
Right.
So some of it was luck.
We're also pretty diverse too, I think, because the residential market has heated up dramatically in Seattle, not at first, more so towards the latter part of 2020. But, I think, actually our project balance has changed completely in the last year. We used to be about 60 to 70% commercial, which were restaurants and offices and those sorts of things, and 30% residential. Now it's probably the opposite, 60 to 70% residential projects and 30% the others.
Commercial's climbing back up a little bit though.
And of the residential, like you cover a lot of ground. Like what's the mixture of projects that you have in that category?
We don't say no to much. So, I mean, right now, I think we're trying to set like a minimum threshold of size of project or complexity of project. So we're not taking on like a single bathroom remodel anymore as much. And we try to give those to our younger peers in the design community, but smaller remodels all the way to ground up new housing. We're doing quite a lot of ADUs and DADUs in the city now because the city is now incentivizing that kind of construction. And then we're trying to do a little bit more multifamily, but we're also very trepidatious about that just because the typical like developer mentality of multifamily here in Seattle is not very design focused, let's say. So we want to do the ones that make sense for us to do and we can do thoughtfully, not just like try to do it the cheapest way possible and smack it up as fast as you can.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I think there's bad developers and there's great developers in Seattle. Absolutely. And the great ones are still need to be profitable. And while our work is not typically crazy expensive, it's also not competitive with the way developers build things. So There's been some really thoughtful developers that have reached out to us, and we're dipped our toe into that a little bit.
We've got one coming up on the books that should start construction later this year. That is going to be, I think, a really nice version of multifamily for the city.
Kaylin, I have kind of a follow-up question, sort of about what you just mentioned about not, or taking all kinds of work, but also being conscious about not growing too fast. So did that manifest itself in saying no to a lot of projects, or did that slow growth help you be more mindful about the projects that you did say yes to, as opposed to, just taking whatever came through the door?
I think it's the second one you said. Like, I think it makes, we don't say no a ton, but we do try to think about each project mindfully, and like, what does it mean with our current workload and our staff, and try to just be at least a little bit intentional about it. But that said, we also have a lot of projects that we're doing for like family or friends, or just things we have to say yes to, and
sure,
those we take, and sometimes they stretch us a little bit too far, but we try to not be stretched too thin.
No, I think the one thing that has occurred is now almost across the board, people reach out to us because they've seen something we've done and they want something like that.
Yeah.
5 years ago, it was like, hey, you've got a friend who's an architect, maybe they can help us with this project. And and sometimes that works out great. Sometimes it's like, whenever we interview for a project, we're very open to saying we may not be the right fit for you. And very recently, I did say no to a project because I was like, this is going to be frustrating for both of us, because what you want is not what we do. There's lots of very capable architects in Seattle that can take that job, So I think we finally got to that point where most of our inquiries are based on, hey, we saw that thing. That's cool. We would like something like that.
Awesome. That's great. Well, congratulations. That's a great place to be.
It took a while.
It only took 10 years. So.
Yeah, it took a while.
I mean, and do you credit any marketing or PR or social media for some of that happening, or how do you guys get your work?
I mean, a lot of our work, we do engage with a PR firm to help us do both social media and press and awards. But a lot of our work does come from referral and word of mouth. And even recommendations from our peers who might not be able to take on a job, or they think we'd be a better fit. So there's a certain amount that comes from that. And I think the social media and the press just sort of helps bolster that. Like, if someone recommends your firm and then they Google you and they see, you're active on social media or like a couple of articles, it bolsters your legitimacy, or, people are like, oh, they're legit.
I think there's a lot of clients who care about that. They want if they're investing in design to improve their home office or whatever it is they're working on, I think they want the team that they hire to sort of be participating in that space. There are, I know some architects in Seattle that are like, well, we don't have any time for that. We're too busy focusing on the work. To sort of imply that kind of marketing doesn't matter. Well, I don't share that belief. I think it does matter. I think, I think you need to, in a way, kind of express what your company and your values are, what your culture is about. I think that's important. And it's fun, and I'd be lying if I didn't say there's a little bit of ego involved. Sure. It's like, we get excited to see our stuff online or in print. That's pretty fun.
Yeah. But I do think it's important to maybe it will be important as we get into the next echelon of jobs, right now we have jobs that are kind of in the certain realm, and what we would love to be able to do more and different typologies, or, more in different kinds of projects. And I do think that PR and press will be helpful to sort of kick us up into that next level, whatever that level is.
I mean, speaking of which, I mean, do you have a dream job, like something you've always wanted to do?
I've always wanted to do a boutique hotel, because I think it's a good balance of kind of the commercial, residential, and now hospitality experience that we have. I think it's like a really fun project type. That would be great.
I would love, love to do like a small civic or cultural building, like a local library or a small community center or something. And that both of those things are kind of in that next level of realm that we would love to move into.
Nice. And do you guys volunteer at all, or do any nonprofit work currently?
I mean, I definitely volunteer for the AIA in Seattle, in Washington.
It wasn't paid for, not sponsored.
And I'm currently teaching, or not current, I will be again teaching in the fall at the UW. We both do quite a bit of, we're active with the UW in reviews and helping students and hosting things in the office for like a lot of the professional practice classes. So we're active in those ways. We've done a little tiny bit of pro bono work. Not a lot has come our way.
Yeah.
But we would, we're open to it. We haven't necessarily like sought it out.
Yeah.
That maybe that's a better answer.
Well, it seems you've been pretty busy, so.
We are.
I'm kind of curious to know if either one of you or neither of you or both of you have kind of the business acumen of running a small practice, outside of just being creatives and great architects, but all the other hats that you have to wear to manage your staff and manage the office. Do either one of you have real strengths in that point and have been able to kind of help carry that part of the office, or has that been a struggle?
It's tough. I mean, it's tough. I like my last job, I was the head architect. And so, my boss, he sort of, I classically say I had all of the responsibility and no authority. It was this appearance that I was running the office on his behalf, which was true to a certain, I had to run everything by him. But one thing that was great about that is he shared everything that was going on in the business, both the goods and the bad. So I sort of had this sort of acute, experience where I learned how this person who had a, pretty booming kind of art, architecture, design business, I got to see that firsthand. I don't know. It's a struggle that we have all the time. I think the sort of like basics about billing and receiving and accounting is not the hardest part, because we have a good bookkeeper that takes care of that for us. I think the hard part that we struggle with is, management is hard. Creating a culture and keeping everyone happy is really hard. I think even though I've been doing this for 10 years and you 7, I still feel like I'm not that far out from being an employee. So I keep thinking like, what would I want if I were an employee at this place, and what would make me happy? So do that so that everyone that works here feels like fulfilled and happy to be here.
I mean, we share in the tasks, and I think the answer is that like, we're okay at it. Yeah. Considering like, I'm always like, people go to school for business,
Right.
I should have taken at least one fucking business class. Right. But I did not. So a lot of it is learning on the go. I've learned a ton from Ian and, kind of been baby stepped into it, but we share responsibility as much as we can. And like, we try to balance the like nutsy boltsy business stuff with like what's going on day to day in the office, and how can we make sure that we still are focused on the culture and like what's good for everyone who sits in.
And we both have colleagues that we can lean, like we have friends who I routinely like, I'll buy them a beer because I have questions about XYZ, and we instituted health insurance, but we didn't know how to do that. We just like,
Sure.
Halen just figured it out.
Yeah.
Like you call and the company helps you figure that out.
So I kind of a follow-up question to that. You've mentioned a bookkeeper. I believe you guys have kind of a PR person or a PR firm that kind of helps you. Are there any other kind of consultants or sort of pieces of the puzzle of your business that you feel have been kind of critical sort of partnerships or hires or relationships?
We have a great structural engineer that we work with almost exclusively on all our projects.
Yep.
I don't know who else. I'm sure we're forgetting someone really important to us.
We also, we are really fortunate that like in our building and in our little area where our office is, we have a ton of creative folks that are all around us. And they are our collaborators a lot of the time. We have like a lighting fabricator, a textile designer, a sculptor, a metal worker, a printmaker. So all of these people are our direct neighbors, and they help us, and we often use their custom pieces in our work. And just that relationship or those relationships, I think, help us be more creative, but also we just get to be more invested in the process, and projects get a little bit more of a local feel.
Yeah, and actually, and one of our neighbors is Shed Architecture, and they're kind of like my mentors from they're a couple of years ahead of me in grad school at UW, and they're now a 12-person firm. So they're who Prentice and Thomas, they're the ones I call to like, hey, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
They'd help me out.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Cool.
So who writes the contracts? Who wears that hat?
Both do.
Yeah.
We both do.
Yeah.
Actually.
I mean, we use AIA contracts, so it's the AIA writes our contracts. We just fill out the forms.
But we collaborate on, some of our projects are like so weird and specific that we oftentimes are like, okay, how do we charge for like this weird dangly thing? And then that weirdo thing over there. And then this thing that we're going to install and make. So some of it is like creative contract writing and billing for stuff that is not normal. And we often do that in projects where we take portions out of the contractor's purview, specifically because they would give it a super high price tag because they're like, I don't know what that is.
Right.
So we will do that, and we will kind of figure out our own billing and contracting.
We do have a lawyer.
Yeah, we have a lawyer.
So he's probably great. So
we pay him to be that.
Yeah, he's really expensive, so we don't like to talk to him very much. But
they also review our contracts sometimes for the really, really big jobs.
Yeah. And then I think what Cam was describing is I like, it's probably not an appropriate description, but it's kind of a hybrid design build where we know how to, because of our friends in this local like core group of people that we work with within the three buildings that our office is in, it's really fun and rewarding to sort of work with our friends. And because, we know how to make things happen with our friends, and it doesn't cost our clients a lot of money. And it's stuff that would otherwise be value engineered out of the project.
Right.
And and oftentimes that's kind of the small percentage which really distinguishes a project, right? It's really
I think so.
That extra little bit of value.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think I routinely, like, not all projects are the same level of portfolio piece. And I think, you look for, if it's, for multiple reasons, the budget isn't there, or it's a small project, there's always at least one good photograph. There's always some things, and, we're not so focused on our vision. It's more like what makes the clients happy. And if the clients are happy, then they're going to recommend us. So I don't think we try not to let ourselves ever get disappointed, because if not all your wonderful ideas are in the project, there's a couple, and be excited about those, and be excited that your clients get to have a thing, and maybe you don't get all the fun stuff because there'll be another project that you can use that idea for.
For sure.
So true. That's so true. What's your process like? Do you guys do you assign a project to a certain staff member or team up together to sort of handle it? How does that work?
So it's a good question. Sometimes it's sort of like a natural fit for one person or another to take on a project. We have a lot of like return clients, especially in the commercial world. So sometimes it makes sense for someone in the office who has the most institutional knowledge of that, that group to take on the project. But sometimes it's also just like this person has some free time, so let's get them involved.
Yeah.
So it kind of works both ways. Ian and I don't work as much together as we probably would like, but we do, as you said, like we try to make time to, show each other what's going on, and we always tend to like make a couple of changes or comments that make the project kind of elevate. So it's always good to do that.
And is your staff still remote, or are you guys starting to kind of come back in the office?
So everybody in our office is fully vaccinated and well past the 2-week. And our goal is to have everyone back in the office in June.
Yeah.
But the one kind of silver lining of this awful pandemic is we've sort of been able to make it work pretty well remotely. I think it's not as good in terms of the like direct collaboration, but we figured it out pretty well, both through technology and just our efforts to stay connected. So I think what we're going to do is not everyone needs to be in the office every day. And I, for one, will probably work from home 1 or 2 days a week indefinitely, because it's really nice to be able to do your laundry, have
Stir the soup.
Yeah, all those things is pretty nice.
I will say I do think it's easier for us to remote, and I think it's really important to get back to the office for the younger staff, especially because I think while they are kicking ass on all the stuff they're doing, they're not getting that sort of mentorship by just osmosis and being in the office and hearing things and being a part of the sort of general office culture. So I'm excited to get back mostly for them.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's well said. You need the collaboration and enthusiasm. Do you guys still make any physical models, or are you guys all digital these days? What's your kind of production?
We're mostly digital, but we actually have a new house project that we've made a model. I personally, that's all I did in grad school and undergrad, made tons and tons of models. But now it's hard. The digital modeling is hard to beat.
I think it's also like we have to really carefully evaluate. Like our margins are very slim still, and our project timelines are so fast and in fact getting quicker. So digital modeling just makes so much more sense when things are moving that quickly. On some projects where we have the luxury of time, it is nice to make a model. And so sometimes, but often it's just like, what does the timeline dictate?
And, certainly a lot of our work, certainly in the commercial world, is interiors focused. So a physical model is just not nearly the value as a computer model.
Right.
On that note, I guess just in terms of kind of your tight fees or your margins and maybe the tighter timelines. I mean, can you ballpark what you think? And this may be not easily answered, I guess, because it would get into sort of how you bill, but just curious, like if you could ballpark a percentage of what your time, how much time you spend that's non-billable, sort of just working on a project or trying to meet tighter budgets or tighter timelines.
I mean, for me, because I sort of do kind of a lot of the administrative stuff. I'm probably 30 to 40%, even as much as 40% non-billable. There are times that, like I also carry that role in the office of like the head detailer and waterproof. I'm the like annoying guy in the corner who tells you need bigger flashing. I do a lot of that. So there's occasions where I'm like heads down detailing for a solid day, which I actually really enjoy. It's kind of fun. But yeah.
Mine varies wildly. Like sometimes I'm half billable, like Ian is, because I'm also doing all kinds of other administrative stuff. And sometimes I'm like 100% billable. It depends on the mix of project and kind of what's going on. But yeah, I think in terms of like the office growing, I'm going to need to reduce my billable hours a little bit in order to facilitate like some of the growth we need to do. But I like the doing, but it's a little hard to manage both. I'm sure you guys
I mean, it's
know
sort
exactly
of
what it
classically,
Yeah.
you're good at doing something and your reward is doing less of it and having someone else do it for
or
you.
it's your reward
Yeah.
is doing that and all the other things you have to do
Yeah,
also.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
tough
complaining
balance.
about it, but I love the doing, but sometimes it becomes a little hard to manage.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people struggle with kind of giving away control. How have you guys experienced that?
Well, I don't see it as control. I see it as like, it's just giving away certain tasks. I think it is hard because no one does it, you know, in my brain, no one does it as good as me, or no one does it the same way. But I think I've sort of gotten over that little cliff where it's kind of exciting to see, well, that's not how I would have done it, but it's pretty great.
Yeah.
So like that's been rewarding, but it's really hard to sort of step back and say, you know, sort of have a conversation maybe with the big pencil and draw some sketches and then see what comes out, rather than I'm going to sit at the computer and draw this floor plan and then I want you to do the rest. I mean, it's challenging.
I think I'm getting better at it. Weirdly, I feel like I'm less concerned about design control. Like I want people to come up with cool ideas, but it's harder sometimes to the more like technical aspects or the organizational aspects of it. That part is really hard to cede control because those are really important to like get the project built. I mean, I think I've learned this very intensely that I used to work in New York at a firm that was like, they did a lot of paper architecture. And so like it looked amazing, but it was never built. So I didn't understand the correlation of like, you have to be organized and draw it well and make it buildable or else it's not going to happen. So those parts I think are harder for me to give up because, it's like, if we don't get it in there, they're not going to build it right.
It's that kind of question. How much do you draw or how little do you draw, right?
Exactly.
Speaking of that, what platforms are you guys on in terms of your production and modeling?
We historically have been primarily AutoCAD for all of our documentation, Rhino for modeling, and Enscape is our rendering engine. We are on Revit, and we're slowly moving more towards Revit. I still use SketchUp, but that's phasing out in the office.
Sure. Are you is your transition to Revit, is that because you're getting larger and more complex projects, and if so, are you also going to implement that on your smaller, say your ADU projects?
Yeah, we actually we're doing the classic pilot project. We've got two. One is a relatively small cabin in Eastern Washington. Another is a dadu, which is a detached accessory dwelling unit. So those are both in Revit.
Okay.
We're trying to figure it out. Like, again, for us, we have to be like laser focused on what's the best platform for this job. And for an example, like right now we have 2 restaurants that are trying to be open within like 2 months right now. So
by the way, we got hired like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, we got hired 2 weeks ago. Yeah. They want to be open in July. It's like a race. So it's not about like, oh, we'd like to do this in Revit because it would be better. It's like, what's the fastest way? We really have to stay on our toes. And so we're doing it in AutoCAD because that's what makes the most sense. But yeah, we'd love to transition a little more into Revit, but again, as the projects allow.
how do you handle that pace, like the change from like, the crazy restaurateur to,
Galen's hair is gray.
Yeah, I might have had like a few nervous breakdowns.
My beard is gray. Galen's hair is gray.
I think we try to balance it, and I might have had a few nervous breakdowns, but in general, I'm good, and our staff is good at saying like, I need help. I need help right now. Can you please help me? And that has been really great. Everyone in the office is also really good about being like, I know that there's a big deadline this week. What can we do to help you? Even if it's just like order lunch or whatever.
Yeah.
It might not be like help with drawing, but it might also be like, could you put together a schedule for me or something? So everyone's great at doing that.
We've also gotten better. We need to continue to get even better at it, is telling our clients their deadlines are unreasonable, because there's just certain things that are outside of our control. And we need to make room for all of the projects that we have.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to say, we can't meet that deadline, or you have to push that out. If you want to work with us, you have to push that out.
I did it last week where I was very proud of myself, because I'm normally a real marshmallow, and when people are like, well, can you do this faster? I'm like, okay. But last week they were like, well, the contractor said they need an extra week to price it, so we figured we could just take that week out of your time. And I said, no. Politely.
Yeah.
That's not acceptable.
I mean, because I think, as you guys all know, like design, it takes time to sort of, you have to be in the right headspace. It just doesn't barf out of you and onto the page. You have to, process.
Sometimes it does.
Yeah, sometimes.
But not all the time.
For the most part, you need a little bit of headspace to do these things.
That's
Sure.
Well, we're getting up here. It's good, about 15 minutes to 1. Do we want to switch to questions and do a little Q&A?
Sure.
Yeah, please do.
Awesome.
Yeah, anyone, just please feel free to chime in if you have questions.
Or you can like chat it if you want.
No one? No questions?
What's the best coffee in Seattle?
Ooh, that is a really good question. Are you partial?
I get Broadcast is good, and
I like Stumptown, which is technically a Portland brand, but it's like a Northwest thing.
That's what we have in the office.
Yeah.
Stumptown.
I also like Cafe Vita.
I have a question. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
So when you guys are meeting with a potential client that's, someone that is worth like putting in some extra hours for, do you set kind of a goal for how much time that you'll spend on like working on that proposal? And is it like kind of a standard thing, or is it like, based on how much you want that client?
I think we have a standard proposal that we use, and we have a few that we use. One's catered toward residential projects, one for commercial projects. Some of the larger kind of commercial projects that we're sort of asked to submit a proposal for, those take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I think, for a residential project, it's really like, most of it is Kaylin and I like meeting and saying like, what do we think this is? And it's, and like getting the description right. There's not a lot to the proposal. It's mostly like, okay, what's our rate on this one versus another one?
We do tend to spend a little bit more one-on-one time with residential clients during that phase, because many of them have never done a construction project or a remodel project before, and they have a lot of questions and they don't know a ton. And so we're a little more hand-holdy at the beginning. So we always assume a couple of extra hours of us being like, then you get a permit and, blah, 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 and talking about financial stuff. So that sometimes can be really long, or just a couple hours. We don't tend to like cut it off ever if we want the job, but at a certain point we're like, are you serious or not? So that part is a little harder. And then for the commercial ones, definitely for some of the smaller commercial, like the proposal period is really short. And then for the bigger jobs, they have a formal interview process and you submit a bunch of stuff and you go and you interview. So that those we always know are going to take a long time.
Yeah. And I don't think as a rule, we don't do designs as part of a proposal.
No.
So it doesn't happen often, but I know sometimes they want like, hey, why don't you give us like an idea of how you'd approach this? And we don't do that.
We do a tiny bit of creative work that is inspired by them, but we don't like design the project and put it in the proposal.
Yeah.
You get burned that way.
Yeah. And I think like with the residential clients, usually it involves a walkthrough of their house, and there's some arm waving that says like, oh, you could do this or that. You know, like we don't say we're not going to say anything until you hire us. We'll talk about it. And, you know.
Cool, thanks.
Javier had a question. He says, what's the best advice for starting out on your own and acquiring clients? What's the best networking approach in your opinion or from experience?
I would say first and foremost, be sincere. I think schmoozing is perfectly acceptable and good as long as you're sincere, because I think that's part of the fun of being a owner of a firm is networking. And I think it's just be, you know,
I think it's a mix of being tenacious but not annoying. Like for instance, we got a shoe store because we were at a party and we met a friend of a friend who was like, I think I'm going to open up a shoe store. And Ian got their number from a friend and called them and said, hey, remember we were chatting at that party? I would love to be included if you're going to do your thing. So you have to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit, but also like not pester people and really like find that like knife edge of tenacity and not being too pushy.
I think when you're starting out too, it's really important to go to events, join groups, meet people.
Volunteer.
I had a friend who once suggested, don't ever turn down a social opportunity. You know, you should go meet people. Like, who knows? It might be terrible and you can go home, but if you don't go, you won't know.
Sure.
And also like, let your peers know that you're going to start, like, and go to events and be like, yeah, if your architect friends know that you're starting out on your own and they have a project that they can't do, they'll be like, oh yeah, Javier, he's starting a firm. You can talk to him. So let all your colleagues know that you're going to do it so that if they ever have a job that they can't do, they could give it to you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
That's great advice.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Let's see. Adam had a question. What's been the biggest learning experience you've had at the early years level and at the level of scale you're currently at?
I think our mistakes are the things that really trigger because they're painful. I messed up on a lot coverage calculation on a permit submittal and got burned really bad. And, you know, like I always thought I did a good job of like understanding building codes and navigating permit rules. But, you know, when you make a mistake and ultimately I got fired from that client, like it hurt. And so, you know, that was an acute experience to say, this stuff matters. You gotta be careful.
I think for me, like maybe not with mistakes that are that big, but like understanding that like perfection is not a thing that we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve the best project for what's going on in the circumstances. And as Ian pointed out, like there's always a nugget that's really good in any crappy project. And not all of them are portfolio pieces. And that's okay. Like, I think when you're an architecture student or when you're young, you like need every project to be like the most meaningful or the most monumental. And you need to let that go a little bit and understand that they're not all going to be that way, but each one of them has a moment or a great part or some win that you had. And you take that with you when you go to the next one. And learning that as a young person, I think was really helpful for where I am now.
All right, Blair had a question. Can you describe an ideal employee at entry level, 3-year, 5-year experience, and what do you look for in a potential employee?
I think, it's the kind of intent. I mean, I think there's sort of a base level, like what skill set you have, that's important. You have to sort of check off those boxes. But for me, it's more like kind of a curious spark, or someone who's, for lack of a better word, like a little bit weird. Like I ask like weird personality questions, and I like to get to know someone as much as possible, because we're kind of a family of sorts in the office. So I think it's important that we all get along with one another.
Yeah.
I think especially in the entry positions, we've had, being able to be confident, but also like resourceful is a huge thing. Like, we don't expect anyone to know how to do everything, but we expect you to be a little bit resourceful and either know that you don't know it and research how to do it a little bit, or ask questions about it. And so I think those skills of just being like, I don't know how to do this, I looked it up and I think the steps are ABC, what do you think about this? That's like huge. For a busy office to have a young person sort of take that initiative and present that, and then you are able to say like, oh, that's great, I would also add D to your list of ABC.
And then I think the more senior people, I think it's a good balance of understanding kind of the more professional side of architecture with a kind of a creative sort of leaning. Because I think, the name best practice was sort of implying that, we're mostly a design focused firm, but it was sort of this subtle nod to say we also know how to do the work. Like we know how to sort of solve the problem and get it built and get it realized. So I think that sort of balance is really important to us.
I have a question about budgets and kind of, when presented with a budget from a client, are you guys pretty adept at being able to tailor your design to the budget? Or, I don't know. I think what's happening right now in Austin, which is kind of difficult, is that things are just so expensive. I'm sure you guys are having the same thing with material shortages, et cetera, but it's just been so difficult to get projects built for what you think they should cost. And it's getting increasingly more difficult, at least in my opinion. So have you guys, are you adept at kind of taking the number and creating something that fits that budget?
The joke is that I need to make a t-shirt for myself that says Dream Crusher on it, because we've had to kind of be dream crushers a little bit, in that like we I think are better at adapting our design to fit the budget, but that is not necessarily what the client has in mind. They think that they should get what they see on HGTV for those prices. So like, that's a harder conversation to have, but we have had to have a bit more of a firm stance about it. Like, we don't think you can get that for this. Like, you cannot, we don't believe you can get that. And we need to get pricing and see where we fall.
Yeah, we bring in contractors really early in the process.
Okay.
So they can do the dream crushing, not us.
Yeah.
Sure.
I crush some dreams early.
Yeah. And do you have, I guess, a handful of contractors? I guess maybe it's easier to kind of create those relationships probably on your residential side, to have kind of a repeat contractor that you can use, maybe not so much in the multifamily sort of arena. Do you guys have kind of your go-to contractors that are willing to, and have you found that you have, sometimes I find like contractors, they may, to work with someone that has like creative detailing, but also view that as like something that they're interested in doing and not necessarily something that they're just going to charge more money for, kind of thing. It's like, I don't have to make a killing off of this house as a contractor. I'm interested in what we're doing as a team and the end result. And I'm willing to kind of put myself out there a little bit to make sure these things are executed well.
I think that's kind of true. I think they have a vested interest in continuing their relationship with us, because for some of these, especially our residential clients, over the past 3 or 4 years, we've handed them so many jobs. So for them, they have a vested interest in, like, we don't have to look for work.
Yeah.
But also we've grown to know each other, and they're like, oh, well, I know what they mean when they show this detail.
And there's shorthand.
Yeah, there's a real shorthand, or like we can say, like, remember that thing that we did it this way, and now we're going to do it upside down, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So they do have an interest, but I think I'm not going to say it's as altruistic as the one that you're portraying.
Maria wanted to kind of chime in on the budget and design question. She asked, do you design what they ask for and show them everything they could have regardless of budget, or show them what they can actually afford and design? Do you present multiple options? More for, I guess her question is more for residential, but do you, I guess if you get a brief and you get a budget, do you show several options or several paths, or do you kind of tend to coalesce around, no, we took everything, we assimilated it, here's our solution?
It varies. I think we always strive for some options, but we have on occasion we'll say, well, this is the option, this is the right thing, and we have the conversation, should we just drum up another option just because, to prove that this is the right option? And we choose to typically not do that. If we feel like this is the right solution, then that's what we show. There's usually, like, if there's like option 1, 2, and 3, there might be option 1 with the A and B, because there's some variation. But to answer the question about, do we show everything beyond what they can afford, that's typically, we try and really get to the budget thing a little sooner than later. I have told clients, we're probably going to show you something that you can't afford, but we need to be adults about it, and you can't get mad at us, and you can't say, well, I want all of that for the less money. That doesn't work, because sometimes, not often, but sometimes our clients just are uninformed and they have more money that they could spend, but they don't want to spend it. And, that's not our place to say whether that's right or wrong. We just, if you want all of these things, we'll show it to you, but what the number you have is not going to be enough for that. Do you want us to do that? Or do you really, what's more important to you? Is the number that you have in your head more important?
As a rule of thumb, I think we always show what they ask for, even if it's our interpretation of it, before we show them any other like zebras and giraffes. You know what I mean? Like and I think that's true of good employees too. They'll always show the option you should always show the option that was discussed and talked about first before you make it better or change it yourself. So we try to take that as our, put our money where our mouth is, and do that with our clients as well. And I think that's important in establishing trust and a good, cordial working relationship. But we're not afraid to show something a little bit outside of their comfort zone or budget zone. But we just need to be very, as Ian said, very clear that, like, this may not fit into your budget. And I think as long as you're transparent about that, then people are a little bit more willing to entertain something, or just that they have an understanding of it, because it impacts them financially.
And are you guys good about establishing or asking that budget question, like meeting one?
I do.
Sometimes
we try to. Okay. Sometimes people are really cagey and they don't want to talk about it, but it's important. But I think,
and it feels like, but this is supposed to be the fun part, right? And we're talking about what we want and our dreams. But
well, it's sort of like, is it how many zeros are in the number? Like I had this anecdote. I had a meeting, and we said, well, do you have a targeted budget? And they said, well, we think 2. And I really didn't know if they meant 2 million or 200,000. Like, because I really, it's like, okay, that's not enough. Like, and I think they mean 2 million, but I couldn't tell. So I think we just want to know, like, is it 5? How many zeros is in the number that you're thinking?
Yeah. Okay, that's funny.
And I think we try really hard to do this. Like we try to put ourselves in our client's position and are empathetic to, no matter the size of the project, it's still a big financial commitment to people, even if
Sure.
we know that $150,000 remodel is like nothing in the scheme of the built environment. It's a huge impact on them. And so
Right.
just trying to we say we understand that it's a huge expense.
Yeah.
And so we try to be respectful of that.
That's a big responsibility.
It's a big responsibility. So I think that's super important, to just not be like throwing caution to the wind all the time, but like being empathetic and showing them options that are more affordable and saying this might be over budget.
And we talk about that a lot in the office. We're like, okay, let's not stop the creative part of this, but we're probably over budget. We're probably going to have to rein this in, and we're probably going to have the conversation with the client at this meeting, or not show it because it's probably way out of their budget.
Yeah. That's great.
It's a dance.
Let's see. Let's see if there are any more questions. Any last question? We want to be able to be very respectful of your time today, so we don't keep you too long. Let you get back to work. Any last minute questions? Anyone? All right. Well, Ian, Kaylin, thank you again so much for joining us today. It was incredible conversation. So interesting to get some insight into your practice, and I hope everyone will get on the internet and go check out your work and follow you on Instagram and see all the cool stuff that you're doing. Thank you, Scott, for setting this up and reaching out on behalf of SFR. And this was amazing. You want to say anything in closing?
No,
I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
And
you bet.
It was great to meet you guys.
Yeah.
And when we come down to Austin, we're going to come visit you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, you should.
That's great.
Open invitation.
All right.
Okay,
Bye,
well,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy your
Happy
weekend.
weekend.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye-bye.